Are meal times a serious struggle? Does your child eat a limited number of foods? Does your child eliminate entire food groups? Are you tired of waiting for them to just grow out of it? Welcome to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater, where you'll learn strategies to help your picky eater expand their palate. With Christine Marotti-Yoder, a pediatric feeding specialist, speech pathologist, mom of a child with feeding issues, and author of Mealtime Mindset. Let's get started. Here's Christine.
Hi, and welcome everyone to another episode of How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. And I am here to help parents all over the world to make mealtimes better, more nutrient dense, more joyful, and less stressful, right? And that's probably everyone's primary reason is less stress, right? That's what we're sort of all after here, I suppose. So today I have a great episode for you. Today we are talking about how we help parents to remediate these oral motor issues in their children, right? I'm always talking about how oral motor is the missing piece that a lot of people miss when it comes to picky eating. It's not addressed, it's not looked at, evaluated, or if it is evaluated, it's not evaluated completely. A lot of providers just don't have this training that is really essential, right? So, a lot of times we just think, well, they don't like touching the food or they don't like looking at the food. But a lot of times that stems from poor oral motor control that left them with this, I don't like this. This doesn't feel right in my mouth, and that rejection, right? So a lot of times that rejection stems from this really poor oral motor control. So I find that sometimes, workshops or courses or feeding therapy can take kids to a certain point. But at some point, if we're still not addressing the oral motor, we might hit that wall again where, okay, they've overcome some of their fears, some of these humps with things that they can handle. But when it actually comes to a food that they truly, truly struggle with oral motor wise, that really is just too difficult for their skill level, they're going to sort of reopen those old fears and those old wounds about, oh, this food is not safe, right? So we do want to address oral motor. And, I find that this is one of the hardest pieces for a few reasons. Well, one is, like any exercise, it really does require repetition and a little bit of dedication. And I find this extremely challenging, especially with younger kids or kids who maybe have some developmental problems and, they have a little bit of trouble learning, or they might be nonverbal if they're on the autism spectrum or have a syndrome of some kind. And sometimes doing these more structured exercises are not something kids are really interested in doing. And it's hard to sort of keep their motivation and attention for this. So that's one piece, right? Is the kids' buy-in of, okay, well, I don't really care about this, right? They don't see that, or they're not making that connection. Oh, food is hard for me because I have difficulty chewing. So let me work on my chewing, right? That's like an adult can get motivated behind that. And we have had adult picky eaters who we have been able to help with improving their oral motor skills. They felt that confidence when it came to the tougher foods for them, and then they were successful with it, right? We don't want to wait until our kids are adults to work on this. Definitely not. In fact, the earlier we work on oral motor, the better the outcomes. Some of our kids, they might not need orthodontic work if we can start getting their tongue in the right spot from a very early age, right? So there is some prevention and long-term gains from doing this sort of work early, for sure. Now, the other piece of this that I think makes oral motor hard is practitioner awareness of this issue, right? So there has actually been a an effort, a significant effort, I would say, to, I don't know if conceal is the right word, or dissuade therapists from doing oral motor work. I remember when I was in grad school, I mean, they like kind of drilled into us, oral motor is, not for speech tasks, right? But it's really hard to separate out speech and feeding because we use all of the same, parts of our body to speak as we do to eat, other than the vocal folds, all this in the mouth, all of the same muscles of the tongue and the lips and the cheeks and the jaw, you still need those pieces to work correctly for speech and for feeding. And a lot of our feeding kids will also have speech issues because the oral motor component is weak. And pretty much my entire initial beginning career was spent explaining to parents that, there's no evidence that oral motor is successful with kids and speech, and sort of dissuading and not even giving it a chance. And there is like this almost like pushback from academia about, why you shouldn't explore oral motor, do oral motor. And I don't understand it. Now that I have taken oral motor classes and I have such a good understanding of how everything works, it literally makes no sense to me why someone would say that this is not relevant to speech or feeding. Right? Because it really is. And though, like I said, everything really works together. So you can't say, well, his tongue is working great for speech, but not so great for feeding, right? He has a tongue thrust and, that affects his feeding, but it's not affecting his speech. And those things are not related to each other. Well, that's just wrong. That's just a lie. They are related, right? So a lot of kids with a tongue thrust will have a lisp. Not in every case, but they might have a lisp. But if they're thrusting their tongue for a lisp, that means they're also thrusting their tongue when they're eating, which means that they're eating sort of incorrectly. Like that swallow is actually a little bit backwards. We want the tongue to, come up to the top and sort of suction back and swallow. But in a tongue thrust, it comes forward and you sort of try to essentially with the tongue thrust, you're kind of moving the food back until it gets to this certain part of the back of the mouth where that reflex will kick in, the swallow reflex. And that's what kids with a tongue thrust swallow are doing. But again, that tongue thrust swallow is also going to impact their speech to some degree. Now, some kids will compensate and they won't have a lisp because they could manipulate their tongue enough to compensate and make it sound like they don't have a lisp, but their tongue is still not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So there's the kids' motivation. There's lack of professional training. So you have like these like conflicting things, happening at the same time. And then there's actually just a very small number of people who have a background in this, right? So, a lot of dietitians will work on feeding therapy, but they don't have any oral motor training because that is not, like they don't really even have any training of the structures of the mouth and the throat, where speech pathologists do have that background training essentially. And of course they can get training, like anyone, I guess, can really learn these things, right? We teach it to our parents, so anyone can learn it, but it's just not something that I think a lot of people are incorporating as part of feeding therapy or remediation of picky eating. Um, in school, a lot of our training for food was related to swallowing dysfunction. Like, really, that's down here, right, in the throat area, but it's not talking about what happens in the mouth. And digestion and swallowing begins in the mouth, because if you don't break down the food well enough, well, you're going to have a problem when it gets to the throat area. And I think a lot of our picky eaters don't break down food well enough, especially food that is very fibrous, right? So commonly and historically, picky eaters will eliminate things like meats and vegetables first. And those are the most fibrous foods. So that means it takes the most effort to break down oral motor wise. So I want you to even think, and I did this exercise myself the other day because we were having some grapes. And I was like, how many chews does it take for me to do one grape? And I really thought about it. And it was 15 chews. And I moved it from one side to the other side of my mouth. Okay. So, right, if this is a child who might be a picky eater and they're having difficulty with things like fresh grapes. Just an example, does not have to be fresh grapes. They might even be okay with fresh grapes. But here's my example, right? So think about it. If they don't have the endurance of their jaw to move it up and down 15 times, that's going to be too hard. If they can't lateralize their tongue, move that food from left to right, then that food's going to be hard. They might spit it out. They might not like that food, right? They might say, oh, I don't like it, not knowing why they don't like it. But oral motor wise, it was really challenging. And a lot of kids just can't express that. They don't even make that connection because adults don't even make that connection sometimes. So how are we going to expect kids to make that connection, right? So oral motor, how do we teach parents? How do we teach you how to remediate this, especially from home, especially putting you in the driver's seat as the parents, as we do in our Picky Plate to Clean Slate course, right? So that's sort of what I'm going to explain is how we teach you guys. I'm not teaching you a course on speech pathology. I'm not teaching you an oral motor course. We teach you sort of the need to know for your kid and some strategies and techniques that can help and make things easier and more functional, right? So that's our goal. So here are some ways that we address oral motor. So we talk about where your tongue is, because if you don't have this basic knowledge of where your tongue needs to be, what is the proper place for your tongue, what should be happening, then how are you going to know if your kid is doing that or not doing that? How are you going to know if things are improving if you don't even know what normal looks like, right? So that's the basics. So we teach you that basic tenet of the tongue. And the tongue is don't get me wrong, all of the pieces are important, but the tongue is one of the most important pieces of this picky eating puzzle because your tongue is doing a lot of the work and it has the most important job to get the food safely from all over your mouth down into your esophagus without anything getting left over, getting left to fall into the airway, right? So it's a very important job that it has for feeding. Has an important job for speech too, but that's not what we're talking about today. Now, we also talk about common oral motor issues. Now, a lot of our parents, as I said in the previous episode, a lot of our parents and again, a lot of professionals, we get reports from professionals that say oral motor is good, no problems there. And then we see all of these oral motor issues, right? So, what are common oral motor issues with kids? Well, almost all of our picky eaters, we see they have very poor jaw strength. So jaw strength, that's, so how do we even measure that? Well, we have kids, we watch them. We watch the kinds of foods they eat. So it's part of the assessment, right? But also we have them, and we'll talk about tools in a minute, but biting on specific tools that are specific like thicknesses and some of them are a little easier to chew than others. Like there's like a hierarchy to these tools. So we use these tools and we see how many chews can they do in a row, right? On left side, on the right side. Sometimes one of their sides is the stronger side. And oftentimes you'll see that that's the side that kids put their food on because it's their stronger side. Now, Have they made it their stronger side by continuing to put food over there and sort of ignoring the other side? Yeah, probably. But nevertheless, right, that's what we're seeing when we first see the child, right? I can't know exactly what happened, everything leading up to that, but that's where they are right now. So that's where we're starting from. That's our baseline. So we see how many chews can they do comfortably? And I call it chewing endurance because we want kids to be able to do at least 10 chews on each of these different levels of difficulty tools, right? Because right, so different food has different requirements because of their fiber, right? So eating a food that's very like light, airy, like popcorn or a veggie straw, cereal, something that breaks down, even bread. Bread breaks down in your mouth very, very quickly with saliva, requires very little chewing. So, tougher things like this are going to be more mimicking of the level of like strength and endurance you would need to break down more fibrous foods. Whereas some of our tools have a hole, which would be it's a little bit easier to break it down. It's a little easier to chew it. So it would be more reminiscent of those like veggie sticks or something that's light like bread cereal, right? So certain tools sort of correspond to certain types of food. So we see how they do with that. Now, a lot of our kids will have a stronger side. Sometimes it's very negligible. Like we might get one or two chews on one side and then maybe three chews on the other side. Sometimes it's very negligible difference. They're about even. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes you can get like 8 chews on one side and then the other side you get like 2. And then they'll stop and they'll hold it, right? Or they'll spit it out. Or like even the tool they'll spit out. But you can see where they are strong and weak. And, I can kind of tell based on how they do with that, what type of foods they would be able to break down. Right. So knowing that that jaw endurance is really important for chewing, especially chewing more difficult foods, right? That's going to be something we should know about when we're trying to fix it, right? Because if we don't know what that is, then we can't fix it. Even things like the tongue, knowing that what the tongue's job is and just knowing some of these basic things about, like words like lateralize, which means the tongue moves left and right in the mouth, which you need to do because if you're chewing food on your teeth, on your molars, at some point the tongue has to move that food from the molars to the middle of the mouth to be able to suction it back and swallow correctly. If it's not doing that, you're going to get a lot of food stuck on the sides of the mouth. Right? So especially in the back, right? A lot of kids get cavities who have poor tongue control, who can't move that food around and manipulate it very well because a lot of food gets left back there because their tongue isn't able to sweep back there. It's not lateralizing very well, right? The lips, even for things like straw drinking, can they round their lips? A lot of our kids will straw drink and they'll use their teeth to stabilize the straw, right? So a lot of kids that are straw biters, they will actually, that's poor jaw stability. They don't have enough, it's actually bad lip stability. They don't have enough strength in their lip to hold that pose, to suck that in and get that good suction. They're relying on their jaw to stabilize and then they'll use their lips. We don't want that. We want the lip should be working independently of the jaw. The jaw should not be playing a role in straw drinking at all, right? It should be the lips doing the work. A lot of times we see the jaw helping because the lips are weak. So knowing these types of issues, right? So there's a few more, of course, but those are some of the common basic ones, I'd say, that a lot of parents and professionals, like I said, don't know to even look for or evaluate. We talk about myofunctional therapy. So many parents are hearing this word now and they think that, oh, well, I need my 2-year-old to have myofunctional therapy. And that's not even something that's possible. Myofunctional therapy is for older kids, kids who can follow multiple step directions. Myofunctional therapy is sort of like physical therapy, but for your mouth. And can it be modified to some degree? Yes. But usually below four below. And honestly, for me, a lot of kids, it's really 6 and below. Um, it depends on how well they're like how good their language is and how much they understand and how willing and compliant they are to do some of these exercises. But it's multi-step directions. Like if they're not going to sit and do multi-step directions, like myofunctional therapy is not going to be for them, right? Because they have to be able to take some time to learn how to do it and practice, because it's not going to come easy to them. They're not using that muscle correctly. So it's sort of like retraining the muscles of the mouth. It's like physical therapy, but for your mouth, right? Which makes a whole lot of sense, but it's not always possible with kids who are really young like that. So we modify, it's called oral motor therapy at that point when they're very young. So we modify, we try to make it as fun as possible. And right, I'm actually adding a bonus into the Picky Plate to Clean Slate course called Overcoming Resistance and Cognitive Barriers to Exercise. Because when kids are really struggling because of their age, it doesn't mean that we're just going to abandon oral motor completely. We can try some other strategies to help make things a little bit easier, like biting on the side, right? That's one strategy that we'll teach and that we could use is, instead of having kids put the food in the middle of their tongue and then they don't have great oral motor skills to move it to the side, let's have them start on the side. Right. So doing like little sort of modifications, until they're at the point where they can follow directions a little bit better, then we can, work a little bit more intensely on the oral motor, but we'll do what we can with their skill level in the meantime. Right. So I talk about like what myofunctional therapy is, what it isn't, what you need to know, the basics. It's not a myofunctional therapy course by any means, right? It's not in place of myofunctional therapy. It's just, this is what you need to know about it, so you can be an informed person when you go and ask, if this is something that your child does need, if we identify it as, oh, okay, even right now, I could tell you they're probably going to need myo, but that's going to be in 3 years. This is what you need to sort of look for, ask for type of a thing, right? Then we talk about the tools and how to use them, right? So I talked a little bit about some of the tools we use for chewing, but there are other tools as well, tools for improving lip strength, tools for improving tongue muscle function, right? There's 8 different muscles just in the tongue alone. So there are specific muscles that help more than others for feeding. They are all important though. So what is sort of, the tools that we use that you can easily use at home with your kids to improve some of these skills? And we are always teaching, even when I was doing myofunctional therapy, we have to teach the parents the exercises anyway, because you have to be able to do them at home with your kids because they're done several times a day, all during the week. So it's not like you just meet with your therapist once a week and that's it. It's expected and required that you are doing these exercises at home multiple times a day. So you have to learn it anyway, regardless of if you're doing one-to-one or if you're taking our course. Like you still have to know this, like sort of on just as yourself, as your own parent, right? It's not in place of a whole therapy program, but we try to give you some of the essential skills that are going to be the most like common and the most we try to get as specific to your child as we can with in our few one-to-one sessions that we do have, but just even knowing like what is the appropriate sequence is going to be really, really key. And then we don't just use tools, but I will tell you that there is a difference between using tools to practice things like chewing and food. So when I took the SOS therapy course, they were very against using tools. They always promoted using food as a tool. And I definitely agree with using food as a tool. However, I do see a really big benefit and difference using the tools. Now, why is that? Well, when you take a bite, let's just say into a veggie straw, the next bite that you take is going to be different because it's already in your mouth. You've already crunched it. Your saliva is already starting to do some chemical reactions to break down that food. So the next bite that you take in your mouth of that same food is not going to be the same. When you use a tool, the resistance is the same every single time you use it. So your jaw gets better practice, and I think gets stronger faster when you're using a tool versus food. Now, that's not to say that we're only going to use the tools, because we have to teach you how to incorporate, because we don't want, it's great if you can chew 10 times on this tube, but like, who cares? Like, the goal is that you're chewing the food, right? So we are going to incorporate the tools and the food. Some food, suggestions that we give for different levels, and how to incorporate them, using these tools, making it a fun, easy transition between tool and food, right? So that's important. And like I said, it is really important, I think, to have both to some degree, because of you get better practice, I think, using the tools. Now, quickly, if you haven't already, make sure you go online and you take our quiz. It's at pickyeaterstest.com. That's Picky Eaters with an S. And if you're not sure where to start with your picky eater, that's a great quiz that will sort of, guide you to the different ways that we can help you, and hopefully, get you started sort of on this journey. So, the last thing is, like I said, these kids that are maybe a little too young, or they just can't follow these more complex directions. We want to give you strategies to make things a little bit easier for them, because, right, our goal is, first and foremost, right, the reason you're listening to this is not because you're probably interested in starting myofunctional therapy. It's because you want your kids to be comfortable eating more food and want to eat more food. So we want to have as many positive experiences with food as possible. So for kids that do struggle oral motor wise, we give you tips on how to make these different foods easier. And sometimes it's literally just that awareness of, oh, wow, okay, they definitely cannot handle steak. So like, how can we then make it easier oral motor wise for them to have that positive experience with steak? Is there a way we can modify the food in some way to make it easier oral motor wise for them? Or is there some some tips or tricks we can give you to make some of these transitions smoother? Because, I'll tell you, a lot of our kids are just, they've had this negative reaction to that food. We have to rebuild their trust with it. And we don't want oral motor to be the reason that they distrust it again, right? So we will try to, make it as positive as we can. Now, if you haven't, learned anything about our course, we have information on our website, of course, at foodallergyfeeding.com/courses, and we will be relaunching it in the next few weeks coming up. And, to kick it off, we do have our free parent workshop, Unlocking Meal Times, that we will be running in February. So if you're interested in registering for that free parent workshop, and any parent who registers will be getting a discount code for the course. So definitely check out, registering for Unlocking Meal Times. And you can get all of that information in our link tree, which is in our Instagram bio. It's also on YouTube in the description here. as well. And we have so much stuff, coming your way. That's amazing. Lots and lots of resources. So even if you are not ready for something like that, there's still lots of free help and resources available to you that we try to make accessible for people all over the world. So hopefully something here today, resonated with you, and hopefully it'll help you along on your journey with your picky eater to make things a little bit easier and more stress-free. So we will see you again next week, and we're going to talk all about how we work on sensory issues at home with our parents. All right. Have a good week, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.